Hello, everyone, and welcome to Geek Spiel On Air. My name is Chris Walters, aka Tiny Rhino, and I'm here with you guests tonight. Let's go ahead and pop over to them and introduce themselves. Matt, say hello to the world.
Hello, world.
And what have you been up to this week, Matt?
No, well, I'm just hanging out here. It's been a long weekend. I got a new game in the mail here today. So
yes, I should have repped the
Em,
shirt tonight. Yeah.
So it hasn't been washed, so it still fits me. So it'll shrink down into where I can't fit it anymore after I wash it. So no, excited about getting that cute little game. Came in Kickstarter. I think she didn't print them until after the Kickstarter had cleared, but it only took her like 2 weeks or 3 weeks. So she must have had them printed right there in the UK.
Yeah, it was pretty quick, and it looked like that on the delivery. I mean, I just got mine Friday, and I got mine before some UK folks too. So yeah, no, folks are getting it fast. So if you are a backer of Quark, you might be getting it soon. So that's pretty great. Matt, do you happen? I didn't bring them. Do you happen to have the mischief cards, the Kickstarter bonus?
Yeah, I got a couple of them here.
And specifically, let's pull out that party horse.
Oh yeah, there we go.
I feel like we always got to mention this. Emma, again, as Matt kind of alluded to, is a good friend of the show. And when she was on, party horse became what it was. Sorry, my kid was yelling and I got distracted. But party horse, the unicorn became what it was, which is party horse. And so it was fun to see that kind of translate onto her art, whether we're just being conceited and think it's a little bit of our inspiration or it's all her. But yeah, no, we're pretty excited to see. I was excited to see.
In fact, I don't want you to recreate it, but anybody who subscribes to our channel will get to see about 12 seconds of the party horse. There's a GIF of Chris acting out the party horse. So yes, for a moment, he becomes a unicorn. So
it's beautiful.
It's worth it.
I'm like the most majestic freaking unicorn you've ever seen. So,
majestic, that's a word for it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it goes well with the beard. It's like, kind of all encompassing. So I'll quit babbling. Steve, say hello to everyone.
Hello, everyone.
This week.
A long week of work. And thoughts of playing games, but didn't get to actually get any done this week, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, I definitely feel you that the work is going to stop all the board games, I think, this week. Steve, you've been on the show before. You joined us for RPG Day.
That is correct. Only once. Right. Trying to find a way to become more of a regular.
Okay. Well, we'll keep you in mind for sure.
Chris, you said you haven't played any games lately, but you just played one with some guys from the Discord.
I did. Okay, let me rephrase that. That's what I spent my afternoon doing. Is playing Stockpile, which was pretty great. I had never played it before. It's a kind of like the theme is stock exchanges. It's a little bit of a kind of one of those sliding ladder-esque style games. Kind of a little bit of it's a stock exchange mechanic for sure. So it was interesting. And I ended up once again winning by a hefty margin. So that's going to lead me into my next conversation, which is I need to be defeated. So if you are watching the stream tonight and are interested in taking me off my pedestal a few notches, feel free to join us on the Discord. Griff, who's in chat right now, has been extremely active in starting games kind of with us, and a lot of folks have then started jumping in on it as well. And we've been playing a couple extra games that have been organized on the Discord 2-3 different times a night for the past, 2-3 weeks. So that's the whole point. That's what we love seeing. So if you want to play some games in an online format, come join us. We'd love to have you. Geek Spiel On Air, and specifically Geek Spiel, is a PG-13 group where we're inclusive of all gamers. We're here to talk and live board games. So if that's what you're excited about, whether that's tabletop RPGs, the tactile components, or again, the online format, we're here for you. I talked about Discord, but again, one of the things we love about Twitch chat is that we can interact with you. So if you're watching the show tonight, feel free to hop in when we start getting into the debates and the different combos. Also, for the same respect, if you're on the podcast, you're listening to us a little delayed, join us on Sundays at 9 Eastern, 8 Central, because we're here and we're ready to chat with you. So if you want to get live with us, just kind of hear some specifics, feel free. So with that, tonight's mechanic we're going to talk about, or at least the subject matter, is drafting games. And we've left it pretty broad for a reason, and we'll get into that as we go. Steve, what's your favorite or most common popular? What drafting game hits the table most often? I know those are two different questions, but
Sure.
feel free to throw one out there for us.
For a game that involves any drafting whatsoever, I'd have to say my favorite is still Citadels, where you're at least drafting rolls each turn. And I just feel that we found a way to maybe find another depth to that game in our play. I know for many, they just think it's a social party game without really any strategy in it. I don't know what Matt's feelings were. I think the first game I got to play with Matt happened to be Citadels, and I think he made a comment afterwards that he had not seen it played that way before.
No, not only had I not seen it played that way before, it never crossed my mind that it could be played that way before. And I am now a student of Stevie Shipe, the master. It is a thing of beauty. And in
you all
fact,
have a teaser for us of what it sounds like or looks like?
I'll set it up so it's going to sound like bragging if it comes from Steve. So you guys have played Citadels before, right? It's a role drafting game. So you get the rolls and they go around the table and everybody takes one. Well, if you are fully aware of the situation and what everyone else at the table has in front of them and what they have, what their likelihood of doing certain things is, you can deduce a good bit of who is taking what. So not only are you trying to take the role that most benefits you, or in the long play, in the short play, in the whatever, but you're also observing and trying to figure out what everyone else is going to do. And that certainly gives you an advantage in the game, but I think it went beyond Steve trying to use that as an advantage. I think that trying to deduce what everybody else was doing was the game that he was playing in itself. I think he got more satisfaction out of that than winning the game in the end anyway. So the cards would go, and it doesn't matter if you're the first one, then you don't have any information. But if you are the fourth one in line, then you know what rolls are gone, and you can see who's in front of you and what they were likely to take. Oh, somebody's always going to take the assassin first, or somebody's always going to take the king, and then kind of work it from there. And I'd never seen anybody do it. And by the end of the game, there was a little bit of rum happening. And there were a few curse words going Steve's way, because it would come, he'd say, "Go ahead and lay down the king." How did you know I had that card? Well, you must have had it because he took that, and he took that, and he was going to take that, and she would have taken it. And it was a real thing of beauty. And there was so much more than the drafting mechanic when it's played that way.
Yeah, I'm going to say right now that we're going to talk about hate drafting at some point in this game or this chat. And Steve, I think you're going to be one of those people that I don't like all the time. There's a difference between hate drafting and figuring things out, but you're flirting with it awfully hard.
Well, in Citadels, it's more if you can deduce what role is most likely to have bad things happen to it that turn, you avoid it, even if it would be beneficial to you. And also, if you know what's being taken in front of you, you can, if you've played it enough, lay out how the rest of the drafts are going to go based on everyone else's needs. It's a great way to avoid being murdered every turn or stolen from. The people that choose after me tend to take the brunt of that quite often, because they're like, "Oh, look, it's a juicy roll," and people could think that I would have taken it based on situation. So it's not so much hate there. It's just I have a whole second game going on where I really enjoy that depth of being able to, I think twice in the same game there, Matt, this does sound like bragging, but be able to say, all right, I will call out the order even though I'm not the king, and I'll tell you who has each role. And I did it twice.
Without error.
Yeah.
Without error. Yeah.
Steve, are you a big role drafting guy? Is that kind of one of your favorite genres there?
As I was preparing for this show, I found that I don't think that I have too many games that would legitimately be claimed to be role drafting. I mean, there could be questionable ones like Dominion, or even something like Five Tribes, where that's more of a worker displacement is kind of how I think of it. But you could also think that, hey, you're drafting the different meeple on the board before others get them, and the analysis of, hey, what would be a good turn.
Right.
So no, I wouldn't say it's one of the strongest mechanics that I'm attracted to. I used to play a lot of Magic the Gathering, and I would say that my favorite form of Magic was drafting, either through league play, where me and I think 6 or 7 friends bought a couple boxes worth of cards and laid them all out, and then had a draft like you would see in the NFL or something like that to put our rosters together, and then ran a series of everyone played each other twice, I think. So even between that or the mixed booster drafts that I've participated in, where everyone bought a couple boosters, you open them at the table with your first opponent, lay them out and do a normal draft. But the neat thing about that was every time you played someone else, you would shuffle your deck in with theirs and redraft.
Oh, okay.
So that was, rather than spending maybe countless hours doing a deck building exercise before the game started, you literally had to think on your feet, draft what was available. You didn't know what your opponent was bringing. Right. And I had a lot of fun playing through that and some success.
Right. Okay. Well, Drunken Physics is in chat, and we were just chatting. He was playing Stockpile with me earlier today. He is an MTG guy, so maybe we'll have him share a thing or two for him in the chat. I'm sure he'll say a thing. But Matt, what is your either drafting game that's your favorite or that's been hitting the table lately? What do you want to talk about?
Well, I think we probably ought to go into the other conversation to talk about what is the drafting mechanic, because just about all of my favorite games have a component that is drafting. And it just depends on how you define it, really. Because, let's go on to where you wanted to go from there, because I think it'll make more sense.
So what do you all define as drafting? And I can kick this off. So for me, I think that I have not seen, correct me if you all feel differently, that drafting as a mechanic has not really been a solo game for a while. It's been more kind of this, I think, as modern board games have developed, and had a conversation with Griff earlier about Settlers being one of those games that's developed over time. Folks are not looking for a game that just has one mechanic. I think folks are looking for an kind of a depthness of complexity and really kind of these multiple aspects. And so I think that a lot of the more popular games that are happening now have drafting as a small component or a component of the game with larger pieces. I think Role Player is an example of a game that has that dice drafting mechanic, but it's paired with kind of a merchant aspect as well. And it's paired with not just drafting dice, but placing dice as well. And so it's not just, okay, I grab the dice that I want, but I grab the dice that I want at the right time so that I could put it in the right spot and use the right mechanic to change something else. So it's such a tight and really focused kind of mechanic. It feels like you really got to be particular about when you pick what color, when you pick what dice, and so on and so forth. But I think one of the things in particular when I talk about drafting for me is that the card or dice goes away. It's not something that comes back. It's not one that maybe I have access to later, that once I pick it, that is mine. And unless, the card is a duplicate or something like that, no one else is going to see that. Thoughts, debates, rebuttals? Yeah,
I mean, it has to be a support mechanic in my mind, right? I mean, other than, what would you classify as a
Seven Wonders, Sagrada? I mean, these are games that...
Yeah, but I mean, but even then, Seven Wonders, there's a set building component, right? So if you go out, you're trying to set build with the science, you're trying to, so
it's set building for a very small. I mean, but I think that the main mechanic is the draft. I mean, yes, it's about. You could also say it's resource management, right? Like it's got the, But I would say it's. That it's such a small, like the resource piece, and that the set collecting. I mean, set collecting really is only for one one mechanic of it, and it's green. I mean, I guess you could talk about the, like, if I have the dispensary, then I can, build something for free. So that's a little bit, but I mean, your main mechanic, I mean, Sushi Go, right? Yes, it's got it's got like one set collecting, but Sushi Go is card drafting. Like, yes, maybe there's like one set in there that if you got a few more points. Yeah. I would definitely say that those are pretty solo card drafting.
All right. I guess my thought is that the drafting is a way of delivering content in that game. But if there isn't some other strategy to marry up with it, then what are you doing with what? To me, I guess I would define drafting as, like you'd said earlier, I'm going to take something from a limited pool of resources that will that I need to be able to fit strategically within my strategy, but I can also use it as a way to prevent and block a strategy that you've got going. I mean, with Sagrada, it's like exactly. I'm looking at those 5 dice that are out there, and I'm going to take one that fits my board because that's kind of a pretty solo game, right? You're trying to build your board, you're trying to get your window right. In Seven Wonders, sometimes those cards will come around and I don't really have anything in there that's going to go in my long-term plan. So I'm going to look at the guy to my left or my right and go, boy, I don't want him to have another military card.
Yeah, say take military if there's something else.
Right. So, or when I go to take a card and play it down to take a wonder, I'm going to take something. Right. I'm going to take something that I think might impact the rest of the table. So, so to me, that feels like drafting is the way that things are delivered in the game. But I don't see how it can be just like a standalone mechanic. But really, when I say it that way, I also think, well, what games out there are a single mechanic?
I guess by single mechanic, I probably was arguing more of a like almost like main
primary mechanic.
Primary mechanic. I'm thinking some of the more modern games where the primary, it's hard to see a primary mechanic because gosh, you get into a game and it's just bluffing and drafting and all of these things. So it's all of these components combined, and multiple ways to win with these varying components. And I do feel, I guess I was trying to say majority or primary mechanic drafting.
I think I agree with that. And to be honest, the first game I thought of when you said this was what we're going to be discussing happened to be Seven Wonders. It's not one of my favorite games. I've played it, 6 or 7 times and enjoyed it, and I've won most of the games. But I didn't find it all that gripping. I guess it's kind of a filler for some people. It's certainly not what I'd call crunchy, but it was enjoyable. It just doesn't have the depth of most of the board games that I like. But Sagrada, I just happened to get as a Christmas present from my family and hadn't even heard of it. So it was a surprise when I opened it. And I'm notoriously known for not rolling dice well in any game that has dice.
Yeah.
So when I saw there were like 90 dice in it, I did kind of cringe. But I've found the gameplay to be really fun. Because it's not overly complicated. It's easier to get on the table. It has a finite number of turns that don't take long. And there is a lot of strategy there, from picking the pattern you're trying to fill to, as Matt was saying, hey, I have to look for something that's going to fit in mine. But to make someone like Chris mad, I would certainly look too and see, well, I have many options, but Chris only needs red and there's only one red die. So I'm going to take that now. So there's different levels to it.
Yeah, for sure. And I think when I think of a game like Sagrada in particular, that it feels like drafting games come in kind of 2 flavors. That solo game that you're talking about, right? Like, yes, you can vary or alter what I'm going to pick by taking that away. But it feels like drafting games lead really well to kind of like a heavy player interaction, combat-y type format as well. I don't know. Maybe that's just me, but I feel like some of those kind of draft mechanics it's not just stealing the card away. Sometimes it's stealing the card away and then again bringing it back later and being able to say, here you go. I think this also feeds into the conversation of Where do you all put deck builders with relation to card drafting? Because I think that it leads to this interesting conversation of, with a deck builder, you have to purchase. I mean, typically it's a merchant mechanic, so you got to purchase something to take it off the board. So it's not. I would argue maybe not a true draft mechanic, because it's hard to say that I always have access to this card. But it feels like kind of like the starter to a deck builder, whereas there's a drafting component there. You may not always be able to afford it, but if you can, you are taking that card off the board, and that it's no longer accessible by the rest of the crew or team.
I would say with regards to Star Realms, Hero Realms, and Ascension, that really, you've surmised it well. You've summarized it well. Some folks might say that it's not a true drafting mechanic because I don't just get to take what's there. Like you said, you have to purchase it. So the card might be available, but I don't have the resources to be able to take it. But when you get later on in the game, I don't know. I always kind of feel like with that game, Star Realms especially, there's seldom going to be a time when I have the resources to purchase a card that we're not late enough in the game that you will as well. So this, I kind of have to, every time I pass over a card, I have to assume that it's not going to be there when it comes back. So, I can't count on that card still being there when my next turn is. So I don't know. I think with, like with Sagrada, we were talking there's that mechanic, I see that Chris is really working towards red, so I'm going to take this red to block him. There's really very little of that. There might be one or two instances in a game or two where that would come up, where I would make a decision pure because I'm really focused on my window, and there are enough decisions to make when the dice come around that I'm going to make one works best for me. And even if I do take that red die because I know you're going for that, when your turn comes, you still get to make a decision on whatever's in front of you. So you still have a strategic decision to make, even though I have impacted that. Whereas with Ascension and really Star Realms, which I've got much more experience in directly, that feels like more drafting, competitive drafting than it does, than Sagrada does.
Yeah, to me, as far as deck builders go, I would think something like Star Realms, Hero Realms definitely feels more of a drafter than, say, something like Dominion, simply because of the scarcity of the resources.
Right.
There's some cards in Star Realms that there's only one in the deck, and even the most popular ones only have 3, whereas the Kingdom cards are 10 to 12 each, through 10 different things. So I wouldn't argue with anyone that deck building games don't have a drafting component to them. But I could, to the point that you made earlier about things like Seven Wonders, where it's the primary, I would say the drafting isn't really the first mechanic that would come to mind for deck builders to me, but certainly somewhat applicable.
Okay. Steve, do you have any additions? We kind of jumped off it for a second, to defining what a drafting game is that you'd like to throw out there?
I would imagine the simplest thing I could come up with is a mechanic where the players involved take turns drawing from a limited resource in the game.
Okay. See, that definition's interesting to me, because I think, again, I go to the same conversation as, I don't really see Dominion as a drafting game, because I can essentially always have access until you run out, right? Until the deck of cards runs out. You always have access to one of those cards. Whereas in a lot of these other, whether it's deck builders or so on, you might have duplicates of that card, but it's in a deck of cards. Like, you're not going to see that right away. Essentially, we could roll it where if the 3 of us are playing, Matt picks up a merchant, I pick up a merchant, and Steve picks up which moat, whatever that card is, we could all just essentially copy that. And so, yes, we are running down the limited number of how many moats are in the deck or so on, But in the same respect, and yes, there's some variability, right? If I see Matt pick up an attack card, like I can draft, a defense card. But in the same respect, like Matt draws an attack card, I can keep drawing the same card. So I think that really differs. But your mechanic seems so general in that definition that it feels, and again, that's not your sole piece clearly, but feels really general there.
Well, in the case of Dominion, when I play that, I'm always trying to build a deck based on the optimum combination of 2 or 3 of these cards coming out. And then when that happens, it feels good. In Star Realms, in Hero Realms, in Ascension, I'm going to buy the best thing that I have. You do make some decisions. Like if I'm playing Star Realms, I'll pick a color and try and focus on blue or green or red. And I may adjust that depending on what I see you buying, or my opponent buying. But I would say that I don't ever bank on, oh man, I'm going to buy these 2 ships because baby, when they come out together, then there's the combo. In Dominion, I'm going to buy 3 or 4 of each of those 4 cards and assume or play towards the fact that combination is going to come up more often. So I would say that strategically in Dominion, I'm playing for the combinations. In Star Realms, I'm playing for the more power and hoping that some of that stuff happens. I don't know.
Steve, you got a rebuttal to our trash talking your definition there?
No, well, I think
No,
what
I think
what I said kind of isn't disproved by your rebuttal there, Chris, and that I did say limited resources, and it would be hard to argue that for most of the game of Dominion that there truly are limited resources.
True, that's for sure. Sure. Now that we've kind of defined it, Matt, do you want to throw out one of your draft games that you like playing or is on the table a lot for you?
Yes, I would. And role player really comes to it for me. I like how in that example, the drafting is really a balancing tactic. It's really a balancing mechanic. There's story, there's dice rolling, there's all the other kind of things that happen there. But the drafting really is a way to mitigate it mitigates away some of the bad luck you can get by rolling dice, and it mitigates away some of the good luck that your opponent may have. So, I don't know. It lets me take strategy where dice rolling exists, because you'll find a lot of people that will say, if I'm rolling dice, then, and that's the main component, then what chance have I got to having a superior strategy? So, and winning. So I think that is a good balancing tactic, a good balancing mechanic. Word.
Steve, you talked earlier about how dice rolling is your nemesis. Played role player?
I have not, unfortunately.
Well, if you get a chance, we have a workshop. We'd love to play with you.
Sure.
I think for me, I go back to one of the first ones I ever played. Real true drafting is Seven Wonders, and I think there's a lot to be desired when it comes to Seven Wonders, which is why, and I'm seeing this a lot when I'm looking at people's top 10 lists and like what are they loving, that Seven Wonders has really shifted from that being the game that they talk about drafting to Seven Wonders Duel being like what everyone talks about. Like if you're talking card drafting, that's the way to do it. And I've only had a limited experience with Seven Wonders Duel, but what I have enjoyed about it is that, yes, there's a card drafting mechanic, right? So like, you can pull off the board, in a certain way, but there's the strategicness of once you reveal the next level, right? Like, so that card might be really great for your engine or mechanic or your scoring, but in the same respect, it might open up something that then gives your opponent way more points, or the next tactic they need, or something like that. And so it's a really interesting mechanic, and I think it evolves that drafting just a little bit more, kind of mitigates some of the silliness that Seven Wonders brings to the table. I also really enjoy a list to make sure that I have it, and I mentioned it earlier, and Drunken Physics said it as well, is Sushi Go. And they also have like the party version. So I have not played the party version, but they know that there's a whole bunch of kind of like that Dominion-esque variability, right? You can add various pieces of sushi that isn't in the base game, right? So maybe one time you don't want to play with sashimi, so you play with eel, or something like that. And so, but yeah, Sushi Go, it's such a, I think what I love about drafting games is I love a real complicated, crunchy Euro with the best of them. But what I love about drafting games is that they're typically super quick. If I want to play something with someone, pick one where drafting is the primary mechanic, and I can get through that game in 30 minutes to an hour. Like Steve was talking about Seven Wonders. Sushi Go is not a long game, and so I feel like that's an easy one to kind of play with a group of folks that's just trying to learn board games in general.
I tell you, that was one of my biggest complaints about Seven Wonders. It was it was an earlier game. It's been out probably 15 years or whatever, and it was an early game that highlighted this drafting mechanic. And I got it. I learned how to play it. I had a great group of friends that we played it with, but it seemed like every time we would sit down to play that, there would be somebody new at the table. And to teach that game in a way that makes any sense, that doesn't sound like a bunch of crap coming out of your mouth, it's really, you could spend 45 minutes explaining to them the strategy that they need to take, and then you wind up going, you know what, let's just play twice. We'll play once and you'll learn it, and then by seeing what everybody else does, and then we'll play it again. And I don't know, it always felt like every time I'd get it out, I was struggling to try and help someone understand it. But then if I sit down and, hey, has everybody played Seven Wonders? Yeah, you can do it in 20 minutes.
Right.
It takes longer to score at the end than it does to pass
to play the game,
to make the decisions and and go. And so that was Sushi Go took all that away. So Sushi Go was Seven Wonders light. You could sit down, you could pass the cute little cards around, and simple strategy and cute cards, cute art, and away it goes. So
it's such a fun theme too. It's like, oh, sushi, like it's like you said, it's just meant to be cute. From the art on the game to the creativeness of the combos. It's meant to be a cute game. Yeah, I will say, Matt, that when we played Seven Wonders on tablecraft, that's exactly how I felt. Like I was teaching the game, and I at some point wanted to just say, you know what? Let's just play it. Let's just play. Let's quit talking about it. Like you're gonna lose your first game, and that's fine. But let's just play. Let's just play.
Oh, and passing hands on the tabletop simulator game is not an easy thing to do. I don't recommend anybody ever do that again.
Yeah. Please do not play. No, I'm just.
Why are there 4 cards in the middle of the table? Where do these 4 cards come from? Wait a minute. For the love of.
I think part of that, and I don't know if PT0, if Jason's in the chat, but I think part of that was just Jason's fumble fingers when it came to TTS. Gosh, it was rough.
We can
Steve, I'm going to start with you on this question. We've got a question in chat. Are you surprised how few games use drafting? And I think that's interesting that the assumption was that we feel like there's not a lot of games that use drafting, because I always feel like there is.
That's kind of an interesting question. I agree. I think there are plenty of games that have it, but as you pointed out, I don't think there are many games that it is the priority of the game. I mean, even newer games like Blood Rage have a drafting for each age. What cards are you going to have to head into the age? There's a lot more to that game, but you cannot deny that there's a drafting component in it, and it comes in 3 stages. Even something like Kemet, I would argue, has drafting in it because of the unique powers that are in the game. Now, granted, it takes time, and you have to build up the resources for it in order to get them. Similar to paying for them in merchant type games, but there's a finite number of them. Most of them are unique, and only a couple of the lower leveled ones even have 2 of the same thing. So the majority of them are unique. So I would definitely say that's drafting too, and that builds as the game goes on. So I wouldn't necessarily say that there's a few games that I believe have it as a mechanic. I just think I would agree that there's probably few these days, or that are being made now, that use it as the majority mechanic in a game.
Matt?
Well, you go back to Steve's definition, which I'm not going to be able to reword as eloquently as he did, but it's a common pool that all players get to make and finite pool of something that all players get to choose from. Puerto Rico, right? Wouldn't you say the roles in that you draft, the role that you take? So, couldn't you say that you draft a little bit when it comes to roll for the galaxy? Because you have to make a decision of what phase are you going to run this game? Well, I guess probably that one's a lesser of an example, but Race for the Galaxy, where you're taking the planets and things, right?
Well, I was going to say, Steve, do you have a rebuttal here?
I would argue, as much as I love Race for the Galaxy, the fact that its separation from Puerto Rico allows each player to pick which role it wants that turn makes that a little less.
Yeah. And I guess you're right.
Yeah, if everyone has access to a role, like simultaneous role drafting is very different than, in my opinion, than these. Again, the mechanic, which I think we're really talking about for us anyways, is this, again, I take it, you can't have it. And when everyone's got a base set of 5 roles that you can pick every turn, it seems less of a drafting and more of just like
you're right. You're absolutely right there. That's a good distinction, because in that example, there's punishment for picking the same as your opponent. So you don't, certain phases don't happen in that turn.
Right. It's a little stronger in Puerto Rico or Twilight Imperium.
Right. I'm gonna echo, of course. We sound like a broken record sometimes on the show. Where I'm starting to see again this, how many games have a primary role as drafting and how many have subtle pieces. And I think we were just playing this the other day too. Seasons is an example, especially if you play with some of the intermediate and expert variant, if like they're essentially creating your deck of 9 is a card drafting. You have a pile, you draft, you throw it around, and then that's your drafting component. I would also argue that while the dice roll is random, each of the dice rolls, you're picking a die, and that for some capacity, someone else doesn't have access to that. Now there are ways to roll and mitigate and change some of the die roll based on ability cards and stuff like that. But I would argue for the most part that there's a lot of games where I wouldn't say, like, I would describe Seasons as more of a resource management, game than I would a drafting game. But it's definitely got the components in there for sure.
Well, there's other games like Mage Knight. I don't know if you two are familiar with that one, that it would probably be most explained as an adventure game, where you're exploring the world and dealing with things and growing in power, but it has no fewer than 3 drafting mechanics in it, where each day or night you roll the dice pool for mana, and each of your turns you get to take one of those dice, and that's a finite resource. You also draft your roll, or the day and the night cards, which are how you take your order in that day or night. And then there's even the drafting of getting the advanced actions or the magic, the spells. You can see what's in the offer, and when you have an opportunity to take one, you can choose one, and then no one else in the game gets it. So while it's not, I think, high on anyone's list of what they would call a drafting game, it, like I said, has no fewer than 3 different drafting mechanics built into it.
For sure. I'm going to transform this conversation because I truly think this is going to be something I want to curb stomp someone by the end of it. And I'm going to talk about it here, and I hope it won't be too much, but it's essentially hate drafting. So like at what point, and for those that either use different terminology or so, it's similar to that kingmaker philosophy of like, in my opinion, I've already lost the game, so I'm going to pick a card that stops someone else from winning. But I think, as both of you have brought up, I mean, Seven Wonders is that example of, if I have no other options and I have to trash a card, whether that's to get 3 gold or to build my wonder, I'm going to pick a card that's not advantageous to someone else on the board. So at what point does hate drafting or king making become a strategy of the game, and what point of it is just being a jerk face? And
it's all jerk face. It is. The only way you would ever make a decision that is king making or just being jerk face is when you've given up. When you have experienced that, when you realize you're not going to win. So I might make a decision that might impact you negatively throughout the game. I might take something that I think you would like, but I'm not going to do it at the expense of my ability to win. Right. So I'm too competitive. And I think when butthurt gets in the way, is, you know what, to me, that's what king making is. I can't win. I'm looking at the table. I'm looking at your 40 victory points and my 10 victory points, and I can't do it. So I'm going to throw this game to Steve because I don't want Chris to win, or I'm going to throw it to Chris because I don't want Steve to win. That's when people go out through the picture window in my living room.
Matt's throwing people out of it.
It's going to look like a tavern scene in an old Western because, feet first, feet overhead out the window. No, it's just, to me, that's the whole thing we try to do against. We want to be inclusive. I want to play games. I want to win. I got to beat you too if I want to win a competitive game. But when people start acting out of spite, my likelihood of inviting them back will go down, along with the blood pressure going up.
That goes up.
Inversely proportionate.
Steve, do you have any thoughts on hate drafting?
Yes, I do. First off, I'd say the biggest component to that is how many people are in the game. If it is a 2-player game, there's no king making to be had there.
Right.
I despise king making as well. It kind of detracts from why did I sit down and invest the time. I've lost plenty of games where people said, as long as Steve doesn't win. And I've kind of gotten used to that, but there are some times that bother more than others. If it isn't out of spite, I can laugh along with it. But I would say that personally, hate drafting is a strategy in some games. But as Matt pointed out, I don't think I would ever do it at the expense of my own game.
Right.
So if I can incorporate it into my game,
then all about it, right?
Well, I'm not against it. So as I said before in Sagrada, if I know that I need to fill a 2, and there happens to be a red 2 out there, and I know one of my opponents can only place a red, I'm probably going to take that because it doesn't detract from mine. Now, it doesn't mean that I'm always looking at everyone's board in Sagrada. That game is so mental that most of my time spent, looking straight down at mine and still messing things up. But like I said, if it's a game with multiple players, I'm not for king making whatsoever. But hate drafting, I still think is a tactic, and it depends where you sit. As we said, to keep bringing this back up, in Seven Wonders, if there's no card there I was hoping to see, then I will certainly probably weigh the next pick on, all right, what will take the most power away from anyone else drafting behind me.
Right.
But I agree with Matt that I would never do it just out of spite and compromise my game. Not necessarily for winning, but even my just enjoyment of the game.
Right.
I never prioritize, I'm only doing this because someone else will suffer for it.
My answer was more emotionally invested than Steve's was, but we said the same thing. And that is that there certainly is strategy to block your opponents, and if we were playing the Seven Wonders and that very situation happened where the person to my left was taking a card they knew I needed because they were going to play something face down, right? But if I could see he was working on a science collection and he took something that I was working towards or something that was going to allow me to be competitive, and then he hands the hand to me and I see something that was a better play for him, I would be questioning what his motives were, and if you're not willing to try and win this game and your only goal is to beat me or to have me lose, then then like you said, Steve, why did we all sit down here and invest our time in this?
Right.
So if you're in Discord with us, if you're watching many of our shows, you will see that we go back and forth. Chris and I are always at each other's throats, and I'm always, but it's because it's lighthearted and it's competitive. If that were ever to really come out on a game table, I think our opinions and our joking would stop quickly.
Right.
So
right. I think Drunken Physics says it's best. It's the worst thing knowing your next 3 hours are dead plays. And so I get it. I know what it's like to be counted out on a game, from square one. But I've also had some of the best games where I round one, I've had a Seven Wonders game where and we keep bringing Seven Wonders up just because I played a billion of them and it's quick. But you play around, you play a hand, and you're just like, I'm not seeing any resources, I'm not seeing anything at all. But then, people aren't seeing what they need either, and you come into round 3 and you're just all of a sudden like, oh crap, I might be able to do this. And so that's hard for me, is to ever just kind of do it out of spite. There's always a chance to win, and even if there isn't, I want the chance to show that maybe I can make that big play at the end. I think the perfect example of that for me was we were on Table Crash a couple weeks ago doing Fire in the Library. And I really wasn't trying to throw the game, but for me, I'm not great at pressure luck games, but for me, I was pushing so hard for that just really cool big point total. Yes, it probably was going to shut the game down a little quicker. Yes, it probably was going to hurt someone else in some way, shape, or form, but I wasn't thinking that. I was purely how can I get back into this game? I'm so far down. I need that big point swing, and I need to find a way to do it.
Well, that was because, I wouldn't consider that hate drafting. You were being reckless in pursuit of a big win, right?
Yeah.
You had you had lost $20 at a time for 4 hours on a Vegas table, and you only had $1,000 left, and you went for one big push, right? I could lose 20, for 4 hours, or I could lose 1,000 in 1 minute and try and win it all back. So you were pressing your luck and
moral of the story is I don't need to go to Vegas, apparently.
Yeah,
So there's 2 pieces in chat that I want to address. One of them is, and we'll start here, is do you ever feel that drafting can lock you out based on luck? Does luck ever just mess you up when it comes to drafting games? Steve, you got a thought on this?
Yes. I very much believe in luck. Even with a math background of trying to know statistics, drafting can certainly pass you by, as it were, in some games, especially in a game with a larger gamer count. If you are less apt to be the first to make a choice, then I think sheer luck could actually just block you out of certain things, because what's attractive to you is probably going to be attractive to someone else in the game as well.
Mm-hmm.
Which is where having a balanced design comes in play, because in Citadels, there are certain advantages to being first, and there are certain advantages to being last.
Absolutely.
So, the advantage of being first is you get to pick. The disadvantage of being first is everybody knows what you took.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the same thing with Lords of Waterdeep when we played that. Obviously, that's a very worker placement game, but once someone has placed a worker, that place is no longer available to be taken. So where you're going to put your workers, you essentially have to draft for that position. And if we're going to go around the table again, and that isn't going to be there, it's not going to be open when it comes back to me. So I'm going to make that decision and do that now. So, I think there is, if it's balanced, it's a good mechanic. It's okay. I'm okay with it. There's still some skill involved.
I hate luck. Luck is literally the most annoying thing for me in games. I was telling someone earlier that the only time I ever want to roll dice that doesn't have a randomization mitigation piece involved is when I'm doing tabletop RPGs, and that's because I can tell a story and I like that more. But I hate the fact that I get into a game and I just roll, and it's just not what I want. Or at Seven Wonders again, I think is a perfect example, because I think Seven Wonders is a game where luck really can just mess with you, and it's just stupid how it does it. Whereas, like, if you don't see the wood in the, maybe the person ahead of you has got one or two soul pieces of wood, three people draft it before you, and yes, you technically still have access to it, but you have to do it through purchasing. And if you don't have that engine built, or don't see the engine to be built for buying, having those gold cards and getting gold and stuff, then you're just not going to see it. So I don't know. I think it's silly. I don't think it really adds any variation. It's one of the examples in chat is talking about Magic the Gathering, and how and I know Steve talked earlier about that being one of your favorite draft pieces is that randomization. I'm all about random. I'm all about adaptability. But I need to know somewhat when I go in what the strategy is. Like, what pieces do I have to work out of? Because if I don't know what that's going to be, it's frustrating to me. It's like I can't pick a strategy when I don't know what tools I have. I can't build a deck when I don't know what cards are coming out, at least in some level of relativity. So I don't know. It's a frustrating piece for me. If I could take most luck out of a game, I would. But I would also say I'm more of a Euro gamer than I am, a luck-based, game player. So that's it for me, for sure.
I'm mostly averse to luck, but I find that the length of the game really has an impact on how much I'm willing to tolerate it. If it's a short game, then there can be more luck in it before it becomes frustrating, because if that game didn't go your way, play another one.
Right, and it's not a huge investment of time and energy to do it.
Right. The longer the game goes, the more I want a way to mitigate the luck, as you're saying, too. Or at least enough familiarity to find ways to strategize. I don't want to say around it, but to take it into account that it's there.
You need
but for a game
you need more paths to victory. You need more ways to be able to adapt your strategy when you see the crap that you're getting.
Sure. I mean, the old school roll and move games have really lost favor for those of us, looking for more out of the exercise of spending time with others playing a game. I criticized a game that we own that my wife was fond of while my son was growing up, was Candyland. And I pointed out that it's not a game. It's an activity to teach children to take turns. Because any game that you can play for me while I'm not at the table, because there are no decisions to be made, is not a game. It's a social activity. So,
okay, I agree with you. I hate Candyland. Candyland's stupid. I play that with my 5-year-old niece, and she loves it. And I'm just like, this is not a game. There's no strategy. I just want to stomp my niece into the ground sometimes. In respect to the board game, not physically violent. I don't want to hurt my niece. But I do, like, I'm super competitive, and I think that luck takes, to some degree, the competitiveness out of it.
Yeah.
I like playing a board game where I love co-ops, and I've loved it more often because it's a set of games that I can play with friends, and especially when folks don't like that aggressive player interaction, like, it's a way for me to play with them. But I love a good game where I can smack talk someone, and I love a good game where I can take that and show off how good of a move it was for me, and how sometimes it really sucks that you couldn't have it. I love those type of games. I was watching you all play Spice Road a couple of weeks ago, and I love it when someone's like, grabs a card and I'm playing this, and then all of a sudden 3 people go, well, there's my strategy. I gotta improvise and adapt, and that competitiveness is great for me. But when you throw randomness in it, it's really, it's just like in Settlers. I was talking about this earlier. I can't make a choice really other than probability and hedging my bets, because if I pick a 6 and we don't see 6 for 27 turns, what am I supposed to do about that? And and it just takes the competitiveness out of the game.
I think with Settlers, though, that the randomness allows it to be an entry game, because it balances the skill away of the better
Sure.
players. So it gives, you can take new people and they can be competitive in Settlers because I might have the superior strategy and take the high probability places to put my cities. And then the numbers don't come up and you can win with junk. So
true, which is probably why I use that as a gateway game with my friends versus
Candyland.
Again, if I could burn all Candylands down, I would.
As long as you don't go into it with an expectation to win, you don't sit down with your niece and hope to win at Candyland. You sit down with your niece and hope to have a good time and make
right. I hope she loves board games, even though it's not a board game. I agree with Steve. I hope that she gets an appreciation out of playing a game.
Yeah. If she runs out of the room screaming, "You're a meanie," then you've done it wrong.
Are you sure? Are you sure that's the problem?
You come out behind her. I like to win. I'm sorry.
Oh, well, one last question I want to throw out here, and then I think we're on to, again, Drunken Physics. Thank you for being involved in chat tonight. Throughout, do you all consider Spice Road a draft mechanic?
Start with
I don't
Steve.
know.
Yeah,
Steve, what do you got for us?
I'm actually not familiar with that game.
Oh,
okay. Matt, you got to play it tonight, right?
Actually, Steve made a couple of arguments tonight, and I would have said yes at the beginning of the show, and now I'm going to say no.
Okay, so what points did Steve make that threw it off for you?
Well, we started talking about how things were, a drafting game where I'm going to take something that's not available to you. That is a component to Spice Road. There are the 2 rows of things, the victory points that you're working towards and the cards that you can just take and pay up for. But I don't think that is pure enough in the drafting decision making. There still has to be strategy that can go with it. I think if we're talking about drafting as a mechanic and drafting is a primary mechanic, which I believe is what Drunken Physics was asking, do I consider Spice Road to be a drafting mechanic game? I don't think that's the primary mechanic there. I think it's set building. And I would have argued an hour ago that drafting is a component in almost every Euro. And now I think I've seen the distinction that, yes, it's a component, but not a primary component, like it is with Seven Wonders, with Sagrada, with Sushi Go.
Okay. I would say, I think what changes this conversation for me just a little bit is, and I love this mechanic, of there being an advantage or disadvantage to drafting a cheaper card versus a more expensive card. So, for example, with Century Spice Road, you could take what's on the far left and take it for free, and it might not be the best card for you, but it's free. Versus there's this one card that works great for your engine, and you could get it by just sacrificing a couple of your spices to move further down the track. I think that adds a level of choice and decision making that makes that is an interesting component to drafting. I guess if I were going to make like a sub condition for drafting games, I think if games have like a decision making mechanic around selecting the card, so it's not just, oh, I have this role and now you don't, but it's, again, do I take the role that is most advantageous to me, or do I take the role that, like, sometimes and I can't think of games right now for some reason that, like, when a role's not taken, I think Puerto Rico's this way.
Puerto Rico, they put coins on them if they're not taken. Yep.
And so at some point, like, that adds a draft mechanic or an incentive to draft that over, gosh, I really don't want the merchant or the builder, excuse me. This is not what I really want to say, but I don't want the builder right now, but or I want the builder right now, but like they don't have any gold on it. I don't have enough gold. But if I pick up the captain, then I can get some gold to maybe use the builder in a future turn. I think that adds a level of it. So I would still probably say I agree with you. I don't think Spice Road has a primary mechanic of card drafting, but I do think that it has more of a card drafting component than some that it's just like some maybe other like pseudo or formal deck builder like Dominion. I think it's more card drafting than Dominion, because again, I think that Dominion I could still pick 3 different moats if I wanted to, whereas I think that there is that strategy to, do I pick what's first and what's cheaper, or do I pick what's most advantageous and maybe invest a little bit more into it?
A good example of that role drafting that you talk about is Small World. So you have to pay to get further down on the list, and there's some decision making there. Obviously, that's a dudes on the map game at heart, but I guess it comes back to there's a mechanic that uses drafting in a way to make that decision more interesting and more strategic.
Right. And it happens more than once in the game, so it is a pretty big part of the game.
Yeah. All right. Any last thoughts? Any games that you didn't talk about tonight that you're just like, ooh, I want to talk about that before we run off?
No. We hit everything I wanted.
Yeah, I got to talk about Citadels again, so I am fulfilled.
And I got to tell the story.
Yes, thank you.
I was humble bragging. I haven't lost a game of Citadels in 20 years.
I don't win them all, especially when people say Steve's not winning this one.
Yeah.
Last game I played, that wasn't an intent, but I spent half of the game dead. It wasn't a good game for me, so I got murdered a lot.
But sometimes there's a second metagame that goes with being successful. We play, like I said, a lot of Settlers here when friends come over because it's a game my wife is pretty competitive at and pretty good at. But we'll sit down and it's like gang up on me because everybody thinks I'm going to be, superior in this game. So it's immediately obvious. Nobody wants to trade with me. Everybody's like building their stuff around me, and the robbers.
Right, they're going to take 2 sheep for 1 wood.
Yep, that's right.
Because they just don't want Matt to have the sheep.
So when it's my turn, I take the dice and I say, it's you and me. This is the only way I'm going to win. Or on my side. So that's the other metagame, is trying to overcome that.
I think we've mentioned all of my games tonight too. I think drafting's a fun component, but I don't like it when it's just the main piece necessarily. I like it to have a little bit more to it. So, I will say before we hop off, which I forgot to do, I typically do at the beginning of the show, I'm going to add on to the end of the show. This is talking about Table Crashers. So we had last week on Table Crashers, I was not there because I was at an event. Month of April is busy for me, of course. But Matt was there, and we actually had Mark LeBlanc coming on and talking about his Kickstarter, which ended last week, correct, Matt?
It did. It ended the very night. It ended the night after our Kickstarter.
Okay. And it's Heroes Welcome, correct?
Uh-huh.
All right. And you all ended up playing, did you play Istanbul?
Istanbul, yep.
Okay.
Which I had never seen before. It's not a game that I'd played or seen played, and I didn't play it either because I was producing and hosting, but it looked like a lot of fun, and it seemed like the kind of game I would like to play.
Yeah, it's one that I've seen played, and I haven't personally played, but it seems fun. I guess it's the last plug. If you are interested in joining us for any of the shows, Table Crashers, we've started Crunchy Cardboard. So if you're not familiar with that, it's kind of spur of the moment. It's kind of just haphazard in a little ways. Where again, the premise of Geek Spiel is that if you want to play a game, hop on Discord and you can play a game, and that's great. But we've also decided that Sunday nights having us on air and Wednesday nights and having Table Crashers on air is great. But if we have someone who's, wants to play a game, we've got a couple of people to join them, and we have someone who wants to stream it, we're going to do it. I think that's it. From Matt, myself, Chris, and Steve, we want to thank you all for joining us, and have a great night.
Good night.
Good night. Thanks.